recently, and by we I mean myself and a handful of others, finished the very first iteration of a new block experience here at Watershed. It was called Liberation. And for those of you who've been around for a long time, you might know that, at Watershed we have these different pathways. They're values. They're these three sort of ideas that we think imperfectly sort of animate and explain our community. The first one is reclamation, this idea that we are orienting ourselves, trying to find ourselves in a long tradition of experiences with God and working out the best ways to put language to that experience, to define and describe our encounter with God in ways that are simultaneously conversant in conversation with those who came before us, perhaps especially within the Christian tradition, but not exclusively, certainly not exclusively, while at the same time learning to speak of God in ways and means that are appropriate and intelligible to our context, because sometimes the context that we are in dialogue with wouldn't translate directly to ours, so that there is this translation process, this give and this take, and that's what Reclamation is, and Preface engages in that a little bit. We're certainly doing that a little bit on Sunday mornings, and then we have a specific block experience, shameless plug, I lead it, where we engage this idea of reclamation. And then the second one is this idea of transformation, this idea that at no point do we ever arrive, any notion of being, any notion of self, any notion of who we are is always in the process of a becoming. And again, it's a both and thing. We both are always in process, in progress, becoming who we are, but sometimes that becoming is a coming awake. It's not just an evolution, it's not just a transformation, but it's a coming awake, a coming to accept, which is a grace-filled practice, a grace-filled experience. It's a coming to accept who we always already were. And sometimes that acceptance, that grace, not that we necessarily need to receive from others, but that we receive and give to ourselves, is the most crucial point of that transformation. Katie talked about this a moment ago. I really resonated with everything she said about the imposter syndrome. Because I think most of us probably all have our own version of that. I know I certainly do. And so part of this transformation, this becoming process, is just learning to accept that you're accepted. Sometimes accepting yourself is step one, So we have reclamation, we have transformation, then we have liberation. Liberation is this messy process of emancipation, of freedom, of both on a interpersonal, relational level, but at a more cultural, societal, systemic level, getting free, freeing others. It is a violent process at times. We talked about that in this liberation block experience that I'm talking about. It's messy. It's not formulaic. We long for formulas because they do create a sense of wholeness. They sort of paper over the contradictions of our life, and that's not intended to be a dig at math, which I'm bad at. There is certainly a place for math. I wish I was better at it, but there is something more art than science about the liberation process. It's not going to resolve itself comfortably or easily. And there was a piece, an article that we engaged in this liberation block experience that just wrapped up this last week by Reverend Lenice Pinkard, who is a minister, an organizer, and activist out in the Bay Area in California. It's called Revolutionary Suicide. Okay, and this idea drawn from the work of Huey Newton, one of the founders of the Black Panthers, not initially engaged in his time, probably because of the implications of it were so daunting for people, but really engaged nicely in this PDF that we sort of circulated in the block. And if anyone is interested, you can email me afterwards, and I'd be happy to forward it along with you to you. But it's just this dense piece that we wrestled with, and this idea of revolutionary suicide, I think, gets at the tension, the hopeful tension that I'm wanting to name here, because what Reverend Pinkard talks about is this need on some level to die. To die to a certain way of being in the world, and that's experienced traumatically at times for people, especially when it's taken on intentionally, it's taken on willingly, dying to certain things that we cling to, systems, perhaps, ways of organizing and ordering our society, our relationships that maybe give us a sense of familiarity, a sense of safety, a sense of privilege, but necessarily, in order to assure that, marginalize or exploit others who look, live, or love differently than us. So there is something unsettling, something rupturing about being willing to die to those systems. And then at a more personal level, there's also a need to sometimes die to other things that we are maybe personally clinging to feel safe and secure in the world. This can be a relationship that is perhaps harmful to us, but the sense of familiarity or proximity to it keeps us there. It could be a job or a vocation. It could be a family dynamic. It could be some other thing that we cling to or lean into in order to build a kind of identity that is at least stable for us. And so this idea of revolutionary suicide is not, it's meant to be jarring. It's a jarring notion. It's a traumatic notion. It's a triggering notion. And forgive me if invoking it is scratching at or clawing at a personal traumatic experience of your own. But this idea of dying to a certain way of being in the world, especially if you find yourself complicit, consciously or unconsciously, occupying a place in the system that benefits from the exploitation or the marginalization of others. So there is something terrifying about that, but then liberating about that. Because once we are, and here's my contention, once we are free of some of these things that we cling to, some of these things that we use to save ourselves, or at least to convince ourselves that we're being saved, once we are free of these things, we're finally free for genuine solidarity. We are free, finally, to be with and for one another. But sometimes letting go of those things that form a buffer between us and those who are different from us is scary.